everyone. My name is Alita Joyce. I'm a user experience researcher at Google and a guest instructor at Nielsen Norman Group. Today, on behalf of the ADP List team, I'm honored to host a keynote and Q&A by Jakob Nielsen, a true pioneer in the field of user experience. With a career spanning over 4 decades, Jakob first made his mark as a university professor before venturing into the high-tech industry and establishing himself as a distinguished UX consultant. Most recently, he started UX Tigers as a home for his writings. Jakob is globally recognized for his development of the 10 usability heuristics, and his research has significantly contributed to making usability methods both more affordable and accessible. His outstanding contributions have not gone unnoticed, earning him a Lifetime Achievement Award from ACM Sig Chi and the title of Titan of Human Factors by the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society. During the keynote, you're welcome to post your questions in the chat and I'll keep track of them. But in the meantime, please join me in welcoming Jakob Nielsen as he shares his keynote, 10 Foundational UX Insights.
Thank you, Alita, and thank you everybody for coming despite all the many time zones that we're live in today. And so, yeah, as Alita said, I'll talk about 10 foundational insights, and they're numbered 1 through 10. But I just want to emphasize first that this is not a priority numbering. It's not like 1 is more important than 2. It's really a rough chronological sequence. So the earlier numbers tend to be earlier in history, but it's not a strict chronological sequence either, because sometimes there are some topics that are very closely related. And in that case, I'm just going to talk about them together. So for these 10 principles, let's start with just thinking about the question of AI, because we have kind of dividing the history of user interfaces really into these 2 periods, before AI and after AI, or BAA, you might also call them. And I do think AI is a fundamental change in UX in many, many, many ways. And I see actually 3 different changes. And the first one is to how we actually do UX work, to the UX profession. I think that's going to be a very revolutionary change, because AI will boost our productivity, boost our deliverables, boost our ability to do a lot of things with generative user interface generation, for example. So radical change in how we do things, in particular in terms of teamwork, because AI actually helps a lot on individual work, but of course all real projects are team-based. And because of this huge added productivity, I think on an individual basis, I also think we'll have even more so on team basis, because smaller teams will be more effective. And that means that probably the work that maybe now takes a team of 100 people can be done by a team of 10 people in 5 to 10 years, which has enormously many implications. For example, we'll cut a lot of the management hierarchy down to maybe only 1 manager of that small team, as opposed to like a manager and directors and a VP and all of that. So we get rid of a lot of that bureaucracy and become more efficient. And I think we can crank out product delivery much faster. And that leads to a lot of changes in the world and how we can serve users better by iterating and delivering what people want much faster than in the past. And I actually also think now this is ADP List, so career development is very important. And I feel this is very important for career development, because you have to position yourself to be able to work in these super efficient product delivery teams. And it'll take another 5 years for us to figure out how that works. But if you're in that process during those 5 years, you will have like superpowers in 5 years of being a super team that can deliver ship products. So I think anybody who's not on a product team right now, they risk getting really left behind in how we do UX in the future. So that's a really revolutionary change. But that's not actually the topic of my talk today, but more something I'd like you to be aware of. The second change is on the user interfaces we're delivering to the users or to the customers. So we'll have a heavy dose of AI in those user interfaces. I'll talk more about that later. And so that'll be a big change to user interfaces as well. And then finally, to the UX principles, and that's the topic of my talk today. I actually think that's less of a change. So big change to how we do UX, big change in what user interfaces are delivered, small change in the underlying principles, because the underlying principles are based on how humans function, not how machines function. And so that's actually why when you hear my talk today, I will have a lot of historical examples and things that were discovered long ago that are still super important to us today and will continue to be super important in 5 or 10 years as we get this very different team structures, very different ways of shipping products, very different actual products being shipped, but the users will be the same people, same humans. So let me now talk about these 10 fundamental insights. And the first insight in user experience is the need for empirical studies, empirical data from watching real users. And this was something that was found at Bell Labs back in the 1940s. So that's a really long time ago in technology. I should say Bell Labs, that was the laboratory for the telephone companies in the United States. It was one of the world's, maybe actually the world's #1 laboratory, sort of high-tech laboratory for decades, actually. They invented a lot of things, but I'm just going to talk about this one thing they did, which was that they realized you've got to actually study users. And today, I hope everybody in the call, they know that we have to study users. But that's not obvious. It doesn't come from nothing. It comes from somebody realizing this, and that was those people at Bell Labs, which I believe was the first sort of UX team in the way I think of UX. You can always talk about even earlier in history, people doing various designs well, obviously. But it comes from this bottom line recognition that you are not the user. And when I say you, I mean anybody who is on a design team. They know too much about their own product, they know too much about technology, and it's very natural to believe that if you want to design for humans, I'm a human, therefore I can judge whether something is good or bad for humans. This is a very natural way of thinking, but it's the wrong way of thinking. Because you cannot just kind of wipe your brain and pretend that you do not know what you do know. And so if you know things about your company, about your product, about computers and technology, you use all that knowledge to interpret what you see on the screen. And therefore, something may be very obvious to you who with that background knowledge, but to an outside customer, they have no clue. So we know this now. They didn't, they discovered that. I'm just going to show you one example of one of their early projects from Bell Labs, and that was the design of the touch-tone telephone. Now, the touch-tone telephone is the key button or push button telephone. Before that, they had rotary dial telephones where you would like dial in a round circle your numbers, and that was a slow process of entering phone numbers. Punching it in is much faster. But what should the layout be of those push buttons? They had to be designed. And so they tested a lot of different designs. I'm just going to show you here 3 of them. And then they tested them with real users, had them try to enter phone numbers. And the labels here show the data from the study. And so the middle one is labeled preferred. That's the one that people actually preferred. They preferred this kind of very simple layout. But it was not the best. It was not the fastest. That's the top one. And you can see here, this is the layout we actually use today. At the bottom, we had the one that had the lowest error rate in the beginning. That is one that looked exactly like a rotary dial. So that people just exactly knew where everything was because it looked like it had always looked to them. But one very important sort of methodological insight from this study was that if you want to design for users, for customers, you cannot do that by just showing them a number of different designs and saying, which one do you prefer? Because they preferred this one, which was much slower. And so what the phone company did, Bell Labs did, was they actually put this one on the phones. And they did that in 1963. And so this is now 60 years ago. And since then, all other phone companies in the world used that same design because it was the best. And in fact, not just phone companies, but also on smartphones and other type of devices where it's not actually physical buttons, but just a picture of a button on a screen, they still use that same design. And because those Bell Labs, early UX people, did that study chose the fastest way of entering phone numbers, I estimated that design has since then been used 40 trillion times. This is a hugely important design for users around the world, even today. And so because they actually did a study and just used the design that's fast for phone numbers, I estimate this has saved the humanity about 1 million person years that they would otherwise have wasted in slower entering of phone numbers on that, the preferred design. So if they just asked people, the world would have lost 1 million person years. And so this really shows you the importance of observing users, not just ask people, what do you want? People don't know what's best for them. That's kind of one of the early realizations. Today we know this, but somebody had to discover that, and that was Bell Labs. My next fundamental insight is the business value of UX, and that also comes from Bell Labs in the early days. Now, I just said that their design had saved the humanity 1 million person years. That's very nice. What does the phone company in some sense care about humanity? I mean, other than they're kind of nice people, I guess, but business-wise, what do they care? No. Business-wise, why it was important for the phone company to design such that phone numbers was fast. You have to think back to how telephony systems worked back in those early days. They worked by having a person's telephone connected through a wire to something called a central office, where they had a gigantic switching equipment, huge electromechanical piece of equipment, very expensive. And as a customer picks up their phone, gets a dial tone, and is entering the phone number, they occupy resources on that switch. And only when they've entered the full phone number will it place the call and kind of free up that those resources can be ready to serve another customer, to place another call. And so if people are slow at entering phone numbers, they occupy that central office switch for a long time. That means you need to build more of them to serve the customer's demand for making phone calls. That will cost millions and millions of dollars for the phone company back in those days. They saved a huge amount of money in provisioning central office equipment because of a better user interface design. The phone company actually had a lot of other examples. I actually worked there many years later. I was certainly not involved in the work back in the 1940s. I'm not that old. So, but they did a lot of other projects as well, where every time they saved like 1 second of, for example, how directory assistance works. Directory assistance is that you can call up an operator, human person, and ask them, what is the phone number of this person in that other town? And they look it up and they tell you the phone number. Save 1 second on that, and the telephone companies in the United States would save $7 million a year. And they did those designs that were better. So it was worth a lot of money to the phone company to do better UX. And since then, we have now seen, of course, it's worth a lot of money to e-commerce companies and so many other companies as well to do better UX. But that kind of first insight that actually make a better user interface and it saves large amounts of money, that comes back from the phone company in the early days. So UX is worth a lot of money, but we can also save a lot of money by doing it better. And that's something I actually personally have worked on for most of my career. And so I came up with this concept of discount usability, of fast and cheap ways of improving user interfaces. Now, there is kind of a saying in project management that people want like 3 things from any project, which is, has to be good, fast, and cheap. But pick 2, because you can't have all 3. Because if it's good and fast, it'll be expensive and so forth. Well, that's true in general, but not actually for usability. Because if we use these fast and cheap methods that I've had a big effort in developing, and other people as well, if you do fast and cheap, then you get good. Because what drives quality in delivered user experience in the shipping product is how many design iterations you go through during the development process. So more iterations, test out more different ideas, design ideas. More iterations means better quality. And how do you get more iterations if you have kind of a certain timeline before you go to launch? Well, by doing each iteration fast, cheap. And so discount usability actually is we can have it all, and that's very happy in our field. So you can in fact do that. Insight number 4 is augmented the human intellect, which is Doug Engelbart. So Doug Engelbart is actually today more famous or more well known for being the inventor of the computer mouse, which of course all desktop computers these days have a mouse on it. So that's a very famous invention that Doug made, and he was a great guy. I actually once had the experience of he lent me his original mouse he invented back in the 1960s. That was a big, clunky, heavy device, and nowadays they're small plastic. But the invention comes from him. But that was not his main project. It was a side project. He invented the mouse because he wanted to quickly point to things on the screen. And mouse turns out to be the best and fastest way to point to things on the screen. But his main project was augmenting the human intellect. So by augmentation, he means that you kind of uplift our intelligence. You make us more insightful, able to do more kind of complex, and again, insightful was kind of the main point here. And he worked on that for decades and invented many interesting things. However, fundamentally, ultimately, it didn't really work. So for these many years, since the 1960s, computers have not really made us able to do more insightful work. They've enabled us to do faster work, which is already very good. You can do it in word processors are superior to writing things by hand, and Excel spreadsheets are superior ways of calculating numbers compared to sitting with a calculator or particularly doing it in your head. So yeah, computers have done many great things, but not augmenting the human intellect until now we got AI. And AI actually is that augmentation device that Doug Engelbart started working on so many years ago. AI actually really does help the human intellect and make us do better insights, more creative, for example. It's a huge creativity boost, an ideation boost. Ideation is free with AI because it just gets so many ideas so quickly. And it's getting better and better. I would say that right now we are in the year 2 of the AI era. Remember my early slide where I said we had before AI, we have after AI. We are very early in after AI. It's still only starting. But even with the early AI we have now, we are seeing a lot of great results. But soon enough, 5 to 10 years, who knows, but soon enough, we will get more superhuman AI, where the AI sort of intelligence, not IQ, because you can measure IQ for an AI, but some way of thinking about its intelligence level will actually be superior to humans, so superhuman intelligence, and that will augment us even more. Because the way to use this is to have a synergy or collaboration or symbiosis between human and AI that's superior to either alone. And we know this from examples where AI already has superhuman intelligence, which is only in certain limited domains, such as playing chess or playing Go and some of those games. So 20, 30 years ago, it was kind of like a big thing, like whether or not a computer would be able to beat, a grandmaster in chess or the world's best grandmaster, the world champion. And for many years, they couldn't. But now they can. For a long time, actually, computers have beaten the world champion. And there's no way a human can ever win in chess. But what turns out to be the case is that a human and AI together play even better. So the synergy or the symbiosis of human and AI is superior to the human, but also superior to the AI because it's more creative gameplay when you combine those two different ways of thinking. And the same is true in UX design. AI can spit out lots of ideas, but we can be better at prioritizing them and figuring out how to put it together into a design strategy and so forth. So the synergy is really the way to use AI. And that idea really goes back all the way to Doug Engelbart, augmenting, not replacing, but augmenting the human intellect. I'll just show you one example of one of the many studies that have been done now of how AI does this. And so this is a study of, it's a controlled experiment, so comparing two groups of people doing the same task, which is business professionals writing various business documents. And these bar charts show you people who did not have AI, so just kind of normal way of doing things, old school way of doing things, and people who used AI, which was in this case ChatGPT. And how many minutes did they take to produce a business document? So that was almost 30 minutes without AI and less than 20 minutes with AI. So big productivity gain, which is the first conclusion. And this is just one study. There's been many other studies with that same conclusion. So it's about 40% productivity boost from using AI. But then the second point from this study, which is why I'm showing you this rather than so many others, is that they subdivided the task of creating a business document into these 3 stages. First, brainstorm or planning. What should we do? Second, actually write the document. 3, edit or revise or polish or make better the final deliverable. And what you see here is that we save a little bit of the upfront time with AI because you don't really need to plan so carefully, because you just prompt something. If it doesn't work, you just do another prompt. Iterating on prompting is very important strategy for using AI. But then what you get, the big savings is that gray bar in the middle, box in the middle, because AI just spits out the text, no delay there. Whereas if you're going to be doing it without AI, write, that takes forever. But I think what's very interesting is that even though the AI condition, people using AI will spend much less time, they actually allocated more time to that final, the black box there, which is editing, polishing, making the final deliverable really good. So because it's so much more efficient for the other stages, you can spend more time in polishing. As a result, in this study and many other studies as well, the quality of the outcome is actually better with AI. And this is not obvious or given, because you might think if I do it faster, yeah, I know that's good kind of money-wise, but maybe the quality will suffer. No, it's faster and it's better. And actually a third observation, not from this study, but from many other studies, is you also get higher satisfaction. So user satisfaction, employee satisfaction, because people like that they can now spend more of their time on the creative part of the process, on the higher level parts of the process, less time on the lower level parts of the process, which the AI they'll just do it. Okay, my next fundamental insight is the graphical user interface. And I'm here crediting this to Xerox PARC because they were the main inventors of this, but there were actually many others as well. But this goes back to the 1970s. Now, commercially, business-wise, it can be credited to the Apple Macintosh in 10 years later. But research-wise, invention-wise, idea-wise, it goes back to the 70s, mainly to Xerox PARC. And so the graphical user interface is also sometimes called the WIMP design, which stands for Windows, icons, menus, and the pointing device. With the pointing device, on mobile devices tends to be a finger, but otherwise it mainly tends to be that mouse that Doug Engelbart invented. And what's interesting about this WIMP is that each of these 4 elements you could have without the others. That's actually what Doug Engelbart did. He invented the mouse, but he used it without icons, without any visual graphics on the screen. It was just pure text-only screen. He was kind of clicking on the words he wanted. Or you could have icons without a mouse. I mean, they could just be pretty things on the screen that illustrated the commands. You could have a menu without any pictures, without any mouse, without any windows, and you just type in the number. The menu items are from 1 to 10, and I type in 7 if I want menu item number 7. In fact, a lot of computers did work that way before we got the graphical user interface. But when you put these things together, it's kind of magic, because they reinforce each other and make for a much smoother interaction. And it turns out, as I mentioned, the Apple Macintosh from 1984 was the commercial launch of this idea. And actually ever since, and this is 40 years, this is a long time, ever since, the graphical user interface has been basically like the only way to really design user interfaces. It's so superior. But now with AI here for the last 2 years or so, we've kind of lost a lot of that usability, because they tend to be command line interfaces, which is really reverting back to DOS and Unix and those terrible user interfaces we used to have that were abandoned for a good reason. So there's a big usability deficit in current AI tools because they have abandoned the graphical user interface. And I have a very strong prediction that we are going to get a hybrid user interface in the future with AI not being chat-based, because chat is a clunky, awkward way of driving an interaction compared to clicking on options, dragging sliders to say more of this, less of that. And in fact, something like Midjourney, they've actually started introducing things like that in their web-based user interface. So it's coming. So don't get kind of sidetracked too much by that chat-based interface. That's a temporary way that they were able to get AI kind of out fast without building the real UI that they needed. I should also say it's because, honestly, these AI products have suffered terribly from lack of good UX involvement. I mean, they're built by super engineers. I mean, all credit to how brilliant those people are. But they don't know user interfaces. They don't know how to design for normal people. They design things that are very clunky and difficult to use. So I believe the future for AI is the hybrid user interface. Reintroduce a lot of these graphical user interface elements that we know lead to superior usability. The next fundamental insight is hypertext, and that was invented by Ted Nielsen back in 1965. And again, the history repeats itself because a lot of these ideas, in the beginning, nothing came of them, but they were insightful ideas, but not very practical because the technology was lacking. But hypertext is really the technology, the idea behind the web. Hypertext just connects pieces of information together across an information space, such as you click, you get. That's such a simple interaction technique. Click, get. And that's how the web works, right? The web has a long list of links on every page, and you click on one link, you get another web page. And that's a beautiful interaction technique. And today, it's a foundation for huge, I mean, basically every website works that way. You click, you get hypertext. Now, the benefit was that we could put so many things online. We could connect so many millions or billions of pieces of information in a single interaction technique. The downside is, of course, that with so much information, it's intimidating, it's overwhelming. You can very easily get lost. So that leads to the question of how do people move in really big information spaces, which we didn't have in the old days. You had maybe 100 documents on your little floppy disk if you were lucky. So with the web, though, information foraging is the theory that explains. This was Peter Piroli and Stu Card developed that theory. Information foraging is the theory of how humans move in big information spaces. And it turns out that what these people discovered is that the way people move in information spaces is very similar to the way animals hunt for food in the forest or forage or move around. And so let's say that you're a wolf or something out in the forest, and there are kind of two tracks, and you can go either down this track or you can go down that track. So what the wolf will do is will kind of sniff and smell where's there the most scent of rabbit. Let's say they're hunting rabbits. So you go where there's a scent of where you hope there's a rabbit at the other end of this trail. And that's what users do online as well. They sniff, this is metaphorically, they smell the links and they find out which link emits information scent, as it's called, that communicates to users that at the other end of this link is something good that they would want. Because people cannot click on all the links. Life is too short to click on all the links on the internet. That is just too much. So you have to be very selective. And the way you select is you look at the links where you're at and you judge what hopefully is on the other end. So the links have to communicate what you'll find. They have to have that strong information scent. And that's these people developed a theory that explains very, very well what happens. The next fundamental insight is irrational users, and this is Jack Carroll who came up with that. Now we're up to the 1980s. And irrational users is an insight that says that people do not behave in a rational way, which you might have thought. For example, in cases like, how do you learn or understand what you can do in a user interface? People don't want to learn, they don't want to read, they don't want to study the help text or a manual. They jump the gun. They have a strong action bias. So people want to get things done. People go on the web or use an app or whatever it is to get something done. They have their goal in mind. That's what they want. They don't want to learn about it. And this is a little bit contrary. I actually bet that a lot of the audience today, you guys are probably, people who like user interfaces, who like technology, who are interested in how it works. And so you might actually like to study a little bit about how something works, but that's not how normal people behave. Normal people don't care about computers, don't care about technology, don't care about design. They care about their problem. They want to get something done, get something solved. That's what they want to do. So they just move. And this is irrational because if only they would spend a few minutes studying, reading up some like launch information or onboarding information before they start using the product, they would be so much better off. They would have made fewer errors. They would understand the conceptual mental model. Yeah, beautiful. That's nice in theory, but it's not how the world works. It's not how people behave. And what Jack Carroll said is people are irrational in these type of circumstances. They have an action bias. And so we have to design for the way people are, not for the way we wish they were, or it would be logical they ought to be. Yeah, well, maybe, but it's not how they are. And so the empirical truth, that's the foundation of all UX. How is it actually? How do people actually behave? We have to design for that. We have to design for the real users, not sort of ideal or hypothetical or hoped for users. Okay, we are now to number 9 of these fundamental insights. The next one is SuperApps. WeChat from China is the most famous of these SuperApps. And WeChat brings together basically all the things you want to do with technology in one user interface. And that is great for usability because you don't have to learn a lot of other things. Now, they're not the first ones, though. You can also trace this back to some integrated software products like Lotus 123. But the idea is with a super app is that you create actually a single integrated experience rather than a fragmented user experience. So unfortunately today, we do have mostly a fragmented user experience. So this idea is kind of rarely implemented. Because if you look at your phone, you have all these buttons, all these icons for different apps. They don't talk. And so you open one app for each thing you want to do rather than having a single integrated user experience. The web is the same, millions of websites, none of which talk, none of which exchange information, none of the one side does know what you did on the other side. So you don't kind of build up a more of an integrated, improving user experience. But it can be done, and it has been done with WeChat. It was done in the earlier days on a smaller scale by integrated software products on the PC. So I really would hope that we can get more of that that integration feeling back. And I actually think AI is one of the things that can drive that because this is really like the next generation of AI, not the current generation. But the next generation is supposed to be agent-based. And so the agent may actually provide us with some of that kind of glue or ways of integrating the underlying individual features. That's at least is my hope. And that leads me actually to, AI. That is the 10th fundamental change we've had in UX. That is just very, very recent. And I kind of say that last year was year 1 because that's ChatGPT 4. Of course, there were many, many AI products, and you can go back 40 years and there was some AI. And I went to some early AI conferences back in the 1980s. So it's been worked on for a long time, but for all that time, it didn't work. It didn't do anything really good. ChatGPT 4 was the first AI product to really, really work well. And now we're getting even better ones coming out. But AI actually has many, many, many implications for user interfaces. But the first one is that it actually is a different interaction paradigm. So this is the most fundamental thing. So computers have always been based on command-based interaction. So by command-based interaction, I mean that the user tells the computer what steps to do. So, make this bigger, make this a fat line or a thin line, make this thing green, and so forth. Each step, you issue the command. And the computer, you give it a command, and the computer says, yes, sir, I'll do what you say. And it does what it's told. Yeah, great. However, the problem is it does exactly as it's told. And quite often, of course, we give it the wrong command, not what we wanted to have done, but what we think we wanted, and those are different, unfortunately. So following commands is not actually doesn't actually lead for great usability. Plus, it's a long, tedious, long set of commands quite often to achieve your goal. So with AI, we get intent-based outcome specification. We do not tell the AI, do these steps. We tell the AI, I want this result, this outcome. So for example, if you're using something like Midjourney, an image generation tool, You could say something like, I want a monkey that's eating a banana while it's riding a bicycle in a circus act or something like that. It'll draw that. And if you don't like that, you say, well, I want an elephant that's riding a bicycle. And even though that has never existed, it'll draw the picture nonetheless. So you just tell it what you want, intent what I want, and I want the outcome. It does it. And it figures out how to do it. You don't have to say that. You don't issue the commands. So that is a huge, huge, huge change. The first time we've had a new interaction paradigm in actually about 60 years. Computers have always been based on commands, except for back in the very early days where you would like wire them and things like that. But for ever since, very early operating systems, it's based on commands, no longer. Now it's intent-based outcome specification. Really a major revolution in user interfaces. Another thing I like to talk about that AI is empowering us now is individualization in the user experience. And to talk about that, I'll give a little bit of the historical background, because the history of user interface has actually been that of ever narrower specification of the users. And so the first thing that happened was the target audience. So let me just show you this picture, just sort of metaphorically represents all users. And so when I started in UX, and this is 41 years ago, one of the first things I learned is you've got to design for the target audience. So let's say that in this example, we say that these people over here are not our customers, and so they're not in our target audience. We don't design for them. We don't care what they need because they're not using our product. So you only design for your target audience. And this goes back to the 1980s, maybe even earlier, but the 1980s is when I learned about it. So that's one of the oldest ideas in user experience. Define your target audience, design for the target audience, don't design for other people who are not using your product. Now in the 1990s, sort of the next step came around, which is say, well, the target audience is all very good, but it's a lot of people. And so they're actually quite different. They have different goals, different backgrounds, different type of behaviors. So we define personas. So let's say, so there's an example here that we might have sort of three personas. So this group is one persona, this group is another persona, and this is a third persona. And then we can sort of design features for each persona. We can weigh this persona may be more important than that persona because we make more money off of them, whatever the reason. So personas were a great step ahead, advance on target audience in terms of a narrower understanding of user circumstances. However, each persona is still millions and millions of people, and each of whom is a unique individual, different people with a lot of differences. So the next level beyond personas is look at individual people. So let's just say we look at this one woman, and that's our individual user, and we want to do something just for her. And so in the 2000s, the approach to doing that, just looking at the one person, was personalization. Now, unfortunately, it turns out personalization doesn't work very well. There are a few exceptions, like TikTok is great at showing you kind of just some videos you like to watch. But generally speaking, all these recommendation things, they mostly recommend things you don't care about. So personalization has not worked well. It's a nice try, but it doesn't really work. And so I think instead, AI is what will come to the rescue here and allows us to do individualized user experience. Because we have this thing called generative UI, which is that just as you can generate the picture of the monkey and the bicycle, you can also generate a user interface. And right now, this is done at design time. And whatever those generative UI products came up with, you want to have a human designer like look at it and fix it up, because it's not going to be perfect. But again, perfection is not really the question. It's just, this is early times. It's year 2, come on. So in a few years, what I think will happen is that generative UI will actually generate the UI specifically for that one user on the spot. So what that person needs right now. And that will be different interfaces for different people. So that will be, I think, can lead a big jump up in usability. But that's a little bit to come. But there actually already now things happening along these lines. So let me give you one example. This example comes from e-commerce. So from selling clothes or fashion online. So the downside of that is that you cannot go and kind of touch and feel the clothes. So what is the solution? The solution is photos. So you give photos of the outfit of a dress, of a suit, of a shirt, whatever it is. And you can look at these photos, and they don't just show you a photo of a suit on a hanger. They show it, a model wearing it. And that's all very nice. And it's better than nothing. The problem with this is that these models don't look like, me, the actual buying customer. So it doesn't really show how this suit would look if I wear it. And that's what, of course, what I want to know, because I want to buy something that will look good on me, not that looks good on some model who's very different. Like, well, take me as an example. Right? I'm kind of bald, I'm sort of a little bit too overweight and all of that. Not the specification of how a model looks in a fashion model in a photo shoot, right? They just look different. And that's how it is. But what we can do in the future is we can use generative UI for the system to actually have data about me, the individual shopper, and it'll actually make a photo on the spot of that person wearing that outfit, and then you can really judge how it's going to look. This is not what we do right now, but Google Shopping actually has introduced a feature called Virtual Try-On, which is an approximation only, but it's going that way, which is that they have a wide spectrum of models looking in very different ways, and then they can map the outfit onto whatever model is the closest fit to how you look. So it's not perfect, but it's actually substantially better than what we had in the past. So that individualization is one of the ways in which AI will improve usability. And in a very specific example, I would predict it would increase sales of fashion, and it'll reduce returns, which, as you know, are very expensive. You buy something and it doesn't look as good as me as it did on that model in the photo. So I've now gone through 10 fundamental insights, and this little chart here shows you the timeline with one dot per insight of when they came to be. And you can see here we have a very wide timeline back from the 1940s up to the 2020s. Half of these things came in the first 40 years before 1980, and half came the second half of this period. And when you see this layout of these dots here indicating the fundamental advances, fundamental insights in UX, this tells me one thing. There will be more dots. There will be more fundamental insights. We don't know everything yet. There will be new things coming in the next 40 years, and probably even after that. But let's just stick to the next 40 years. There will be more things coming. What will they be? Well, that I don't know, because if I knew, I will just tell you, and then they wouldn't be new, they would be known. But there will be new things. We are not done yet developing how UX works. And there'll be new, very, very interesting things to come. But what I've convinced you today is that the old things are also still important. We still need to kind of, so it's accumulative. It's not replacing. The new things don't replace the old things in terms of the insights. They accumulate or advance our understanding of how to create great design. So I'll just end with one last kind of long view of history, which is of the UX profession itself. And I've just summarized this by the number of UX people in the world. So back in 1947, I talked about Bell Labs. There was a group of about 10 people. That was the first. And then from then on until 1983, and I picked that year because that's when I started. So we grew the field to up to about 1,000 people. So that was a growth of 100 times more UX people in the world. But still, of course, very few. When I started, this was a very small field of very few people. Then during my career, those 41 years, we grew from 1,000 UX people in the world to now we have about 3 million UX people in the world. So that was a factor of 3,000, hugely more growth than in the previous period. And now in the next upcoming period to come, I'm predicting we will grow again and we'll end up with about 100 million UX people in the world. So that's a growth factor of 33 more to come. But why was the growth so big there in this middle period? That was because we had three major revolutions in user interfaces. The first one was the PC revolution. So before the PC, we had mainframes. And for mainframes, you had a purchasing department buying the software that was then sort of shoveled off to the poor users to suffer under. And that didn't lead to a lot of motivation for good usability in the design of software. But with the PC, the person using the software was also the person buying the software. And that, of course, hugely increased the motivation for software companies or computer companies to develop better usability, better user interface design. Second revolution was the web revolution. And the web revolution actually was probably even more important than the PC revolution in increasing companies' willingness to invest in UX. Because before the web, back in that PC era, what happened was I would buy some software, let's say a spreadsheet. Then after buying it, I would install it on my PC, I would start using it, and then I would discover I cannot make a pie chart in Excel, it's too difficult. But by the time I discovered that usability is too low, Bill Gates already has my money, and he's like laughing all the way to the bank, as the saying goes. Now, despite that, Microsoft did actually invest in usability, but not as much in those early days as they're doing now, because the web made a huge change. So before the web, it was pay money first, get user experience second. After the web, it became, I go to the website, I try to figure out the homepage, I try to navigate their information architecture, I hopefully find the product page, I try to read it and understand it, I add to the shopping cart, I maybe can figure out how to check out of the shopping cart. If all those many steps have good usability, then I give them money. So on the web, it is user experience first, pay money second. Money only comes if good UX. Oh, that means companies want to really spend on UX. And so that was a really big change. And then the third revolution is the mobile revolution. The computer in your pocket, you always have a user interface. User interfaces are basically everything. So UX is kind of eating the world. I mean, Mark Andreessen, who's the inventor of the graphical user interface to the web, is a very famous guy, and he also now is a big venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. So he came up with this phrase, he said, software is eating the world. And that has certainly been true for the last many years. More and more things are software driven. And I would actually say software is eating the world, but it's only had breakfast yet, because many more things will be software driven in the future than are now. But the side effect of that, which is interesting to us, is that user interfaces are also eating the world, because more and more things are driven or accessed through a user interface that used to be sort of done differently. So UX becomes the interface to a bigger and bigger and bigger part of the world, and mobile has been a big part of making that now you pick it up and everything happens in a user interface. So that's the third thing that drove a huge extra growth in UX. Now, going forward, as I point out, I think we will have going up to about 100 million UX people in the world over the next period, and AI will drive that, because it's going to be even more things are going to be driven by computers and by technology and by UX, because if people cannot figure out how to use it, it might as well not exist. So it's very, very important to do that. So that's my prediction for the future. I think that about 2060 is when we'll reach a stage of what I would call good user experience, by which I mean that normal people can just understand how to use technology. It's not like technology is oppressing people. Right now, it's very frustrating for most normal people. And remember, you are not the user. We know too much. So our experience is not typical of the average population, but the average population, it's still very frustrating, very intimidating. Very, very often they cannot get done what they want to do. So I'm predicting that about 2060, we will reach a state, not perfect, because it can always get even better, but we'll reach a state where humans really are in control of technology, not frustrated or oppressed, empowering users. And AI will actually do a lot of that if we use it right. Going back to Doug Engelbart, augmenting the human intellect, not replacing, but augmenting. If we do it that way, we will actually reach a quite satisfying stage relatively soon in the history of world perspective. It's not that long to wait. So that's what I think we'll get to. Now, where are we now? I think we're about 20% of the way there in terms of user experience quality to where I want it to be and where I think it actually will be. Now, that 20% comes from all these many years of UX that I talked about. And so we have done our job as old-timer UX people. We've done our job. We have improved user interfaces dramatically compared to how they were when I started. Mainframe user experience was absolutely terrible. That was maybe 1 or 2% of the way there. So we've made it from that 1 or 2% of acceptable experience quality to maybe 20%. And you may think that's not a lot of outcome out of 40 years worth of my career, and so many other people have worked even longer. But it actually is percentage-wise a rather large leap up. But we're about 20% of the way there, the remaining 80% to come. That's my challenge to you. Make that happen. Make those last 80% happen. Make it such that we have good user experience, that humans are in control of technology, that humans are empowered. And I think it can happen. I think it will happen. It will take work, and we should base ourselves on these fundamental insights that I covered today. And if we do that, I think we can do it. Thank you very much.
I love that, Jacob. Cheers to much more growth in our field of user experience and all of the groundwork that you and other pioneers have done to lay that. Thank you so much. A couple of quick notes before we jump into Q&A. Yes, the session today was recorded, so that will be available for you in the coming weeks, posted both to ADP List's website as well as the Substack, so keep an eye out there for that. Everyone that also registered today will get an email with more information on accessing that. Jacob, I always love your balance in your talks of lots of metaphors, cases, research examples, and one that comes to mind is your chess example of how humans are kind of augmenting and working with AI historically in that context. And I also find the use of image generation AI to be amazing. And to be honest, your newsletter is my favorite example of mid-journey that I've seen. If y'all haven't seen Jacob's newsletter, I just posted it in the chat, but the graphics in it are always fantastic. Highly recommend checking that out and getting some inspiration for yourself, as well as just seeing all of your latest work in writing, Jacob. Some of the questions that come up are pretty in lots of different topics based on your 10 insights. So I want to get started with some of the more foundational insights of just really how can we start to push this decision making that isn't just based on user preferences, but true kind of intent-based outcomes. So what are the best ways to learn on how humans functions and make decisions in a product?
Right. Well, I think that goes back to that very first insight, which is watching users. And luckily, this is another place where AI is actually helping because it's become cheaper and cheaper to do this. In the old days, we had to have a usability lab with a lot of cameras and bring people into our location. Today, we can do it remotely. We can also do it internationally through live translation. So OpenAI had a very nice demo of their translation voice translation capabilities that are actually stunning compared to what was possible just a few years ago. So that's another thing I really recommend, international user research, because people in your own country and other countries are definitely different. But yeah, just watching people remains the number one way, because people are always surprising. If you do user research or usability study and you don't get, a big surprise research finding, that shows you did the study wrong, because there are always surprises. So you shouldn't just sit around, meeting room table and talk to each other and say, this is what we think. Find out, right? There are no secrets in user experience. All you got to do is look. And we know how to look. We have those methods have been developed for all these many years. So just look.
Amazing. And then laddering on top of that, because sometimes it's not just the research, it's like the culture or the stakeholders maybe prioritizing other things. So what advice do you have on making those product decisions at a cross-functional level that really prioritize those user behaviors and intent?
I mean, you're right on that. And the first thing we have to recognize is there are, in fact, multiple priorities, and doing good design is only one of them, and there are many others. And so we have to always design in such a way that it maximizes, business impacts and profitability of the company and those type of things. But given that we do that, so given we're designing something that actually is going to help the company, and it should help the users, of course, that's our goal, but it should also help the company. And luckily, we can do that. If you make an easier to use website, it's going to be better for the users, and you will sell more. But you also have to convince all these people who don't know all our stuff that this is true. And there's a variety of ways of doing this. And the number one actually goes back to the good old user testing, which is that if you can get your stakeholders to watch just a few user sessions, that is usually a revelation to them. because sad to say, most people who work in a company have lost touch with their customers. They don't ever see a customer. I mean, salespeople excluded, but the product people, they don't ever see a customer. And that's one of your superpowers as a UX person, is you have the customers. And actually, most business people are smart enough to recognize that the customers are very important, you know. And so if you can be the one who shows the stakeholders, this is the customers, this is what they say about our product, that is invaluable. The best is to have them watch live. Nothing beats watching live. But second best is watching a video. Third best is reading a description that is not nearly as compelling. But all three methods are certainly available to you. So I think that you use your users as your argumentation device. And then another thing I think is kind of looking ahead is because I do believe in this, that we'll have these much more efficient teams in the future compared to the past. Also, more efficient, smaller companies. You know, the bigger the company, the more divorced they are from the customers. The smaller the company, the more they have close touch. And so I believe that AI will empower smaller companies more so than bigger companies. So they will change the balance of power. Not 100%, but it'll change. And so with smaller teams, smaller companies comes this closer customer contact. And it just is it's on you as a UX person to kind of make those things explicit. Because if you don't make explicit, well, this is what the customers, how they behave, this is what it means to our product, this is what making those design changes will then mean to the business. You shouldn't expect that people can connect those dots if they are in another field. I mean, and it's just that, I mean, you can think about us versus some other field, and you go to a doctor and they show you your cholesterol number and they say you should take this pill and therefore you will not die. I mean, if you're not a specialist in those type of medical things, you would not make those connections between a blood test and diseases. So they have to explain it to you. And this is, by the way, this is another place where I think AI will have huge benefits, is in that kind of explaining medical type of things. Because sad to say, doctors are not great at explaining to kind of average patients some of these medical insights. I mean, again, they know too much about their own field and they're bad at explaining. So when you go to a medical, an appointment, you often will get what's called a post-visit summary, which is like this write-up of what the doctor sort of concluded and what he she recommends that you do to get more healthy. And studies actually show that a lot of patients have no clue, they don't understand those at all. But AI can actually rewrite those, and there's some hospitals actually experimenting with this now. You can rewrite it at a reading level that more fits that individual patient. So that's again an individualization. You get an individualized medical report that is easier to understand. But yeah, just as the medical system has to explain things such that the patients can understand them, similarly, UX people, we have to explain our things in ways that make sense to non-UX people. And I feel like often we're a little bit too arrogant, saying it should be obvious to everybody. No, we have to explain.
Yeah, I love that. So true. And also a fantastic segue into some of our AI related questions. So you mentioned the use cases of healthcare there and medicine. And you also talked a bit today about some of the e-commerce applications through things like Google Shopping. Are there any other industries where you think designers will have the most opportunity to make an impact of designing with AI?
Yeah, I actually think that the third field that's going to be very, very big is education, because AI is great at explaining things in ways that make sense to the individual student. And again, people are at different levels of understanding, different levels of progression in any given things that they're learning. So individualized tutoring is honestly the best way to learn. And that's how like really rich people have always done it. They hired somebody to teach their kid, but that's not sustainable in the world at large. But AI will be that individual tutor. So I actually think that the teacher's role will probably change to be more like the motivator, the person who kind of drives the classroom forward and make sure that people are kind of on track and everything, not so much the person who explains things. That may really, really be the AI that does that. I also think this is a huge opportunity for the world at large, because there's a lot of countries where the schools work really terribly. I mean, every country, there's always some criticism about the school system, but there are some places where it works very poorly. And so they will have the bigger benefit of that. But I think in all countries, even in countries that have like rich and well-funded school systems, it can be done better. And AI, I think, will have a major impact there. So I think there's going to be a lot of educational use of AI that we're going to be seeing as it gets better and better, because of that individualized ability of AI. AI can do it just for you, right? If you have a trouble with like one particular way of thinking, it can explain that better in ways that it knows will likely be something you'll be able to understand because it has worked with you before on other problems.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, let's wrap up with one question. So I noticed when you were presenting your predictions of the job market, right, of most of your career and now heading into the future, there was a bit of pessimism around like, well, we're in a dip right now. Maybe there are layoffs happening. So what words of optimism do you have for practitioners kind of getting through the current stage of the market into the longer term vision?
Yeah, well, I think this is where there's some benefits to being grizzled and having been through a lot of things before, because we've honestly been through setbacks before. I mean, I presented it just as a progression, but that's not how it is when you live through it. It goes in zigzags. You know, it goes up, but it goes in zigzags. And so we're now in a zag, I guess. We're in a little bit of a dip down. But you have to see it in a longer term perspective. And I mean, like the dot-com bubble was a bubble, it burst, and then it grew back from then. We had the big finance crisis, the so-called Great Recession in 2009. A lot of companies went out of business. There was a lot of downsizing and layoffs and everything. And this happens again and again and again. And so I don't really actually worry that it's true. It's absolutely true that there have been a lot of layoffs in the last maybe 2 years or so. And they came, I mean, it's like the dot-com bubble. There was a bubble. There was just actually too much. It was like too much unsustained fast growth, which was nice while it happened, but it was too fast. A little bit of that air goes out of that balloon, but then it comes back again. So that, I think, is like history shows, honestly, that UX has been on an enormously up path. And we can see that there's a lot of new potential. And I actually want to say that AI is an opportunity, not a threat, because AI will allow us to do UX work at about half the price of now, because our productivity will about double. Now, if people hear me say productivity will double, each person can do twice the work, you may think this means each person does twice the work, half the people fired. We don't need those guys anymore. We can have only half the people can do all the work. But that's only true if there's a fixed amount of work, and there's not a fixed amount of work. In UX, it's true, actually, in other areas too, but particularly in UX, there's an enormous unmet need. There's so much bad design in the world. Plus, there'll be so much new design as well, but all these new capabilities that AI is enabling, and they cannot be done without UX, because then you will have a small percentage of the population will be able to use things, just designed as a side effect of the implementation by some engineers. Yeah, a few people can use it, absolutely, and that's what we've been seeing with these early tools that came out, because they were so fantastic in what they could do, their utility, their features, that those few people who were capable grabbed onto it. But the vast majority of the population, no. And so to get the broad user base, broad customer base, and again, let's think business-wise, broad income base, because more people will buy, that requires good design. So I feel like there's enormous unmet need. And so it's not fixed need, it's much more need. And that's why, even if each person can do twice as much work, that means that the cost per work unit, per like screen design or per research insight, however you want to measure that, the cost of that thing goes to half. It actually probably goes to less than half, because also more efficient teamwork. And so one thing we know from economics is that if something is cheaper, more will be bought. So right now, there's a lot of companies that do not do the amount of UX they should. They often do nothing because it's too expensive for them. Make it cheaper and more people will buy. I mean, we still have to explain why it's good to buy it, but if it's cheaper, more will be done. There's not a fixed amount of UX work in the world that needs to be done. There's more UX work in the world that needs to be done.
Amazing. Thank you, Jakob. Beautiful growth mindset to wrap up today's conversation on those 10 foundational UX insights. Thank you all so much for your questions, all of the chats. Please be on the lookout in the coming days for that recording, and we really appreciate your time today. Thank you, Jakob.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.